ईश्वरं वा सुता श्रीमन् पूर्वा सन्ध्या
Hi everyone, welcome to Conversations with Shusara. I'm Megan, this is Shusara, Akona, Kumara, and this is PLAN. I usually have something for you.
You do usually have something. Yeah. So tonight, let's do something a little different. Rather than you starting with a question, I'm going to start with a topic, and then we'll just let it roll, okay? So what I wanted to talk about today is manipulation from the space of the ego and its relationship to humility, which may seem very contradictory, but necessary. This is a really important thing to discuss with people who are on a deeper spiritual path. So the ego itself, your sense of the personal self, who you think yourself to be, all the beliefs that you're enmeshed in, and the judgments that you are locked in, and all of these things, they function from the three primary places of domination, manipulation, and control. And those three words are really important because that's all the ego is capable of. The ego is not capable of love. Pelian, you know that very well, right? Not capable of love, not capable of all of these things that we think of as positive states of mind. Now, it's capable of achieving a positive state of mind, but that positive state of mind, of course, has been born out of negative states of mind. So they aren't real. They're fictitious versions of what you actually are in your core essence. But the basis of the ego comes from the space of everything that it does comes out of a need to manipulate, to control, and even to dominate others or a situation or whatever it may be. Because the ego in and of itself feels completely powerless. And from that space, it doesn't feel good. So it creates self-righteousness out of its pain. And within that state of self-righteousness comes pride very, very strongly. And pride is something that is born out of pain, and that's what it's covering up. So when you see someone who's incredibly prideful about whatever it is that's moving, you know that it's false. Yeah. So it's very easy to look at the prideful person and go, oh, he's so full of himself. When actually the reverse is true. The reason the pride comes through is because of the lack of self-worth that's underneath it. Because he is too afraid of allowing the emotion that's trapped in that low self-worth to come forward. So it has to get covered up. And it does that through pride. And within that prideful space, you really see the movement of manipulation. It's a very subtle and tricky thing to deal with. Remember, in your life, what you're being asked to do is to view your own life from back here, right? So you're going through the motions, you're doing what needs to get done and all of that. But as the stories play themselves out, you're asked to sit back here so that you can observe it all very objectively. And in that space, that's when you're capable of beginning to see how this domination, manipulation, and control dynamic is functioning in your life, within all the stories in your life. So Megan, you'll see it in your students, yeah. And Pelian, you're gonna see it in your children, right? And of course, they are completely unaware of it, and they'll have all kinds of benevolent justifiers for why they're doing what they're doing. And they will be completely incapable of seeing that what's actually underneath their motivation is not coming from their hearts. They will not be able to see that. It's completely hidden from them. But as a seeker, that is part of your journey. And you become adept first at witnessing it in others, right? And then the trick is to begin to witness it in yourself. And it's far harder, right? Because when these things are running, it's the program, and the program is unconscious. So what you're being called to do then is to be able to see into the unconscious level of the personal stories that sit there for you, so that you can begin to unravel all of that, right? Very hard to do when, yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question just to clarify that. So are you saying that you'll see it in your outside world, so I will see it in my students, and is it a reflection of me?
Only in
Or-
as far as it's just a reflection of that fractured unconscious collective. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Which is you
You,
as
okay.
the personal self. Right.
Okay.
Right. But when you're capable of viewing it on an objective level, it's not you. You can very
Okay.
easily recognize that. Yeah. It's just, and it's not them either. It's just the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just the program running the program in the form of different people.
So that is something that, because it's always said that whatever you see out there is your mirror. So
Mm.
it's not something, doesn't necessarily have to be your mirror. If there's no trigger there and you're just noticing something, it's
Mhm.
not everything out there, it's just your mirror.
Right, and the issue with that teaching is it's accurate, but at the same time it's not, because it still holds separation in place to say that's your mirror. You understand? There's only one mind playing out as all of it. So on that level, is it true that it's your mirror? Yes, but are you you? No, no. Right, because the same things that trigger you, the story that sits underneath it will be the same trigger that she's going to have, right? It just looks different because of the stories and the way they're playing out. It looks different, but if you can get down to the very essence of what the trigger represents, it's the same story for everybody. Once you truly get underneath it, and there are layers and layers and layers and layers, right? But it is just the same story that plays out. So the interesting thing with manipulation, and I wanted to speak to this, especially within the spiritual community, is that I see this all the time with seekers. People have been walking different paths. They'll take on different teachings. They can even take on the teachings that I would give, right? And then those teachings get utilized by the ego, and you've seen that before. We call it now spiritual ego, because the teachings get utilized to become your justifier from you functioning in a space that's not in alignment with the teachings, right? And people loved, it's hysterical when you have students who, it was really funny if you're ever in a situation where you have two students who are partners with each other, because then you'll watch them use the teachings against each other, which is really quite something. But that happens all the time, and you don't even recognize you're doing it. And the role that humility plays is such a big one, because remember what I'm telling you is that it's unconscious, right? So you're manipulating, you're trying to manipulate the situation, or you're trying to manipulate the person. It can even be your own guide that you're trying to manipulate, and you won't be able to see it as, manipulation. It's completely justified because, you see something that I don't, let's say. And so you're going to hold that story. It's very important for you to hold on to that story. And what the guide is going to do is, of course, the guide sees right through it. And the guide is going to call you on it, right? Or maybe disengage completely. Because if you start the whole game, and it's a game of the ego, then a lot of times what the guide's going to do is they'll just completely disengage, not respond to you, not give you anything. Because if I give you something, I'm making the story real for you. I continue to make it real for you, right? Or maybe the guide just gives you kind of one or two pieces of information where it says, nice ego trip you're on. Don't think I don't see the manipulation running here, or whatever the comment may be. And what it requires of the student now is to take that piece and to turn it in on yourself and to really look, is it true? Is it true? Not an easy thing to do, right? Not an easy thing to do. Because now it means, if it's true, it means, that person was right and I just did something that in my right mind, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have done. And it takes a great amount of humility to come back from that. And and I speak to humility all the time. People who are around me, I speak to it all the time, yeah. And I always say that those who were chosen to actually come here, at least through my own lineage, to come here in service, the most humble were chosen. Why? Because it takes an enormous amount of humility to walk out of this paradigm, right? Complete surrender. Is that another way to look at humility? Just complete surrender. So that in the moment where I think that the case that I'm making is in your best interest and you should be on board with that, and you're telling me it's just ego talking and you're trying to manipulate the situation, in that moment it takes an enormous amount of humility to go, okay, okay, let me look and let me see. And greater humility even yet to come out of that space and say, you were right. And I'm sorry even, right? Yeah. And I can't kind of drive that point home enough, because that's the piece over and over and over again where students get tripped up. And when students who really do have a calling for deeper spiritual work and a drive and a commitment to really get in there and do their work, like when they get stuck in the space of pride, it's their undoing every time. Every time. Yeah. So it's very dangerous, and I would highly recommend that anyone out there who wants to, of course the work I do is about walking off the life-death cycle altogether, right? To just be your essence. And not everyone who's going to walk this path this lifetime is going to achieve that. It's the rare few that do. But it doesn't mean that even if it's not achieved in a lifetime, it doesn't mean you can't make enormous advances, right? So that the next lifetime could be that great awakening, final awakening moment. Yeah. But until that humility is so in place, you just won't get there. And that is something with both of you that I would commend both of you on, because I've seen it and in your own journeys over and over and over again. How Pyongyang with you could be angry with me because of what I'm forcing you to look at, and you've been angry with me. But always to come back from that space of, oh my God, you were right. Yeah, right. And certainly I don't need an apology. It doesn't mean anything to me to have you angry with me. That's fine. I mean, it's beautiful. Get angry, that's good. But then you take the anger and you're utilizing it, right? Utilizing it to get in deeper, right? And yeah, I don't have to fight with you that way like I do with her. She's an easier student that way. Yeah. But it is true of both of you, and I can't say that of all my students. Some of them, it's a constant battle. It's just a constant battle. And I wish I could speak to whatever grace it is that puts us in a place where we can really hold our humility. I don't know why some of us are more capable than others. It may be just an evolutionary kind of a thing. But it is so necessary, and it's so worth the work to just continue to recognize when you've been holding your own story so strongly that you're in real opposition to anybody who's coming up against you, and to go in and to look at the level of pride that you're carrying, and is that really in your best interest? If you can back up and say, okay, so maybe I am right, maybe it is, maybe nobody can see what I can see, but is it in my best interest to hold myself like this with everybody else because I have to prove my point and I have to get you to see, what I see? Is that really what's best for everybody, right? And it almost never is, unless you're functioning from an incredibly high level of sight, which not a lot of people are. And that's the, you know, as I always teach, you know, how do we walk this journey, right? We walk this upward journey with one hand up and with one hand down, right? So you're there to always help the next person coming up because you have walked a part of the path that they haven't, and you have experience and you have wisdom that they don't have yet. So you're always there for that. But simultaneously, you're always reaching a hand up too for those who have greater wisdom. And that's a component that is so important because it's the mind, it being as kind of as tricky as it is, loves to take it when you've had experiences along the way. You know, let's say there's like a bottom and a very top, which there isn't, but let's just say there is. And you know that based on your experiences, you're somewhere in here. You know you're not there yet, but you feel pretty good about all the experiences that you've had along the way and all these aha moments. And so that's where the danger comes in, that the mind will take that and turn it into this false sense of enlightenment. That's what we call it, like a false sense of enlightenment, where now it'll utilize that. So then when those who are above you in their level of evolution, you'll begin to question them. Yeah. And you'll begin to, yeah, to begin to question things because you've had enough experience and you've walked a level. So now maybe what they're doing doesn't make sense to you because it seems to contradict what you've walked. And that's a dangerous place where now you're coming in from the space of, I've got this. Mm-hmm. And maybe that person isn't what I thought they were, or, you know, something's not right here. You've had that. Mm-hmm. Everyone does. Mm-hmm. Everyone does. Mm-hmm. And that's where it takes, you know, a great amount of trust. Your guide is your guide because they've walked it. They have walked it. And you won't understand all of it.
And can I just add, because I know that this, I know it was big for me in some situations, and I'm sure it would be big for other seekers, but there's a point where you feel like, yes, my guide has great sight, and yes, they've walked this, but what I'm going through right now, they've never actually been through. So how do they really know what I'm dealing with?
Right.
You know,
right.
Like you feel like maybe they're not really full. Maybe I need to give them some more details of this story to, you know, make it a little more clear to them where I'm at, what's going on. You know, so I think that can sometimes play in there too.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, because of course the mind has to feel like it's been understood. Yeah, and seen clearly. That's of course a huge component all the way through. You know, you're not seeing me clearly. And it's not true. It's not true. So, you know, once you're in the awareness of the guide, you're seen. You're seen. And the guide was what you don't recognize, and you think you need to tell a story, right? Well, the guide is never ever going to trust your words. Ever. Because what are words? Words are just polarized energy that has been turned into something you could spit out of your mouth. Well, is it true? Well, of course not. What is true? Well, the energy behind it. That's what the guide is looking at, right? And I know I've had instances with you, especially texting, where I've had to call you on things because I didn't need to read anything. I felt it. Really?
Yeah.
Is that right? Would be convinced what you were saying to me in that moment was accurate, and I'm like, it's not accurate. I don't care how convinced you are, it's not accurate. But after deeper self-inquiry around it, you saw it wasn't, but you were convinced. Yeah, truly convinced.
I'm a little bit different than her in that I always trusted you. I always did. But I would, to try to get around, like, I had to realize this, but to get around maybe having to do the work you wanted me to do.
Right.
I felt if I didn't tell the whole story,
Mhm.
that I would look better.
Yeah.
And my story would look better, and I didn't have to feel guilty about what I think that I did, and or how I might have embarrassed myself to somebody else, and like I just didn't want to hear it from you, because then it would have been, yes, Megan, that is it. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. Sure.
You did embarrass yourself, or you were wrong for doing that.
Yeah.
And for everybody out there watching this, to show, well, at least this is my experience, that you don't even need to tell her anything. Because one time I went over to see her, and she just looked at me, and I was like, and she like grabbed me and took me upstairs to her office, and I had like this full blown panic attack, and I was like, and after I was able to catch my breath, I said to her, I said, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. So I learned after that, doesn't matter what I say, she already knows.
That's good. That's great. It's funny because that's a very typical situation, and I had the same exact thing with my guide. Because you're all an ego, right? So when the ego is presented with the self, it's like it just falls apart. This moment of like panic and terror and fear, and it's like just terrible. And then it all comes forward, which is a beautiful thing. The pain that's sitting there that you've really been trying to stuff or to deny, whatever, run away from, it all just comes out, which is great. It's exactly what it needs to do. It's great. Yeah.
It felt good.
Yeah.
At the end.
At the end.
That actually happened to me one time. I remember I knew that I was using spiritual understandings to stop what was running,
Yes.
but I couldn't get in there enough because it just kept rationalizing everything.
Right.
And then I remember we were back when we were doing BBS back in your office.
Yeah.
And I remember we were sitting up there, and you said something, and I was like, yeah, that's good. Can you trigger me? Because I just really triggered so I can start going in and look and see what's going on. And I remember it was like immediate, like it was already triggered, yeah.
It was already running.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is such a gift.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
Not too many people can say that.
Yeah. Oh my God, you get triggered.
I know, and isn't that a funny thing that too, I think about, I can't not think about like Muji, all these people going because they just want to be in his grace and in his space, and that it feels so good, and that's not my job. My job is not to support you feeling good, because the feeling good is all ego anyway.
Yeah.
I'd much rather trigger you. Now, not that I go around purposefully, usually.
Every once in a while.
Triggering people. I'll do it on occasion. But certainly to be there as the one piece of truth you're going to get in your world, right? Because in your world you're going to go around with all your stories, and who are you looking for? You're always looking for the people who will support you in your stories, right? So I'm totally on board with your victimization. Yeah, and that's what we're looking for in our lives with our friends and our lovers and hopefully parents and things like that. And that's not at all what I'll do. I'll see the story and let's call you on your, and I'm going to call you on your bluff, right? Because the story's not rational anyway. The story's not real. It's just something that's been identified with. It's fake. So let me call you on it and make you look at it. Yeah, make you really get into wow, why am I hanging on to that as if it's true, as if it's real? Yeah. And some of that can be really painful, because if we look at, if you're functioning it from a level of manipulation, well, you're really attached to whatever it is that you're holding. Maybe it's, I'm really attached to, I know how to do this thing and you don't, and you can't see me, and you aren't acknowledging my capacity or my level of sight, right? There's a lot of attachment to that. So for me to say, really? Is that right? Oh yeah, and then the story just continues. But for someone who truly has surrendered to the process, as soon as you hear is that right? That's all you need, because that right there is the check, right? That's the check. As soon as the question comes back, it gives you the opportunity to really look at, is that right? Yeah. Or does the ego gloss over the question and just utilize it as another opportunity to keep pressing its agenda? Yeah. And it's hysterical to me because, the guide sees you. And when it comes to, and I've had this with some of my own students, moments where they've been like, you don't see me, you don't kind of honor or respect this thing in me that I'm capable of. And it's become their story. Why? Because it's their story of themselves, right? They don't honor and respect what they're capable of. And so they project it out on me. And it's hysterical to me because I see far more of what they're capable of than they do. And I hold them in greater esteem than they're capable of holding themselves, right? But because it's hidden from them, they have to project it out. And so it comes on me. And now that's utilized by the mind, especially in this kind of situation, when you have a student and a teacher. Now that's utilized by the mind to create doubt in the teacher. You see, oh, I have this, this came to me from spirit or from the divine, and I saw it, and I know what to do with it, and we need to do this, and I'll be like, no. And the reality of it is that no ego is going to tell me what I need to do. No ego is going to dictate to me what my level of sight is or should be, because I can stand in my own authority. Yeah. But coming up against that, the ego that's bringing that story isn't capable of seeing it, right? And to come back to, that's the pride, and then to come back to the humility, that's what it takes. It takes, because it can come that way, and that's okay, right? It can come that way, prideful, arrogant. What do you know? You don't. I've seen this, and I know what it is. Okay, but as soon as I stand in my authority against it, now battle's on, right? So now what's going to happen? Well, one of two things. Either in that point, the capacity for humility comes forward. Yeah, it goes, okay, so you're not in alignment with it. I need to look at it, right? Not to automatically say, I must be completely wrong, I must be an idiot, none of it, other than to just say, if you're not in alignment with it, I at least need to look at it. Which is very impersonal, very impersonal. And that's what humility is capable of doing, of being impersonal, going, okay. It's not self-deprecating. It doesn't go, oh, I'm such an idiot, and God, I'll never trust myself to think that I could ever, connect with the masters or whatever. That is so not what you need to be doing with that. If anything, my job is to help you to begin to recognize more and more and to trust when you really have been given true sight. Yeah, not to tear it apart on you, but I do have to call you out when it's not true sight and to show you, that's the mind. That's the mind. It's messing with you and trying to play itself off as, Saint Germain or whatever it may be. Yeah. Yeah. And that's not easy to walk through, but really necessary, right? So I'm going to use you as an example in that, only that because you have very specific work that you do, which you have to be tapped in, and the personal self has to be completely out of the way for you to do your work, right? So you have to have 100% trust in that. And so if along the way I could never point out to you where mind was using it in order to push its own agenda, then you'd end up in this murky area, right? Mm-hmm. And so the point is, every time you move through it, it just gives you another piece where you recognize, oh, that's what the mind's capable of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow, because I never would have seen that otherwise. But it doesn't take away the real experience that you've had, right? And it begins to show you the subtle differences between the real and the unreal that's trying to pass itself off as being real. Yeah. And it is very subtle. Yeah, very subtle. But that's what's required. As you continue to move, your own energetics, you become more and more refined. And to stay in that space in a world where you're constantly being energetically pummeled is very challenging, right? So you have to be really in tune with that very still, small voice inside that kind of can recognize that little shift in energy. Yeah. And then not engage in that. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, since we're talking about manipulation, domination, control, am I allowed to use Juice Plus as an example?
Sure.
Okay. So, we're taking on this Juice Plus venture, and, when I'm going through information and I come across new benefits or something and someone pops into my like, oh, so-and-so has an issue with that, like, they'd be like really great for them, And then I notice that there's this thing there where it's like, you really do want to present it to them because you know that there's benefits.
Yes, right.
But then I also know that I can make money off of you.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So I actually met with a friend last night and we were talking about it, and it didn't go the way I was hoping that it would. Mm-hmm. But I also found out that she's also on something that it's supposed to do something to your cells and whatever. It's supposed to be, pretty much just as beneficial as Juice Plus. So I was like, well, that's great, like, and it wasn't like I was hurt. Like, normally in those cases I'd be like hurt, or I'd feel stupid, or I would feel dejected or whatever, and I didn't feel that way. But I feel like now we're walking this line of heart versus manipulation,
Right.
You want this to be a heart-based business. You
Yes.
want this, and it's what's really driving me right now is that I really feel like, holy cow, like, we could really be of service with this.
Yes.
But then at the back of my head, there's, you could really make some money with this. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that, like, I feel like, can I give it a check? Can I give it a check? You know what I mean? But at the same time, when you look at everybody that's doing network marketing and stuff, they want to dominate. They want to
Right.
Take control of their lives. And,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you kind of have to manipulate people a little bit to, get them to even see the benefits. How can I put this to them so that they'll see, like, what's their story, so that I can, give them a spiel that's going to match what, is really, so I just want to make sure that I try to stay in heart as much as possible, because I feel like there is that potential of this becoming mind manipulation.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and especially because it's based in financial stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, the whole money concept and construct is a completely, fallen paradigm thing. Outside of this, money is not even a thought. It just doesn't exist. There's no, it just doesn't, right? And for those of you that don't understand that, if you just put yourself kind of in your imagination for a moment, where you live in a space where instant manifestation is your natural beingness, what do you need money for? Right. I mean, you don't, because whatever you want, it's right there in the moment, because you just materialized it out of projection. And that's actually very true. This is the only place where you actually have to, go through labor to bring in money that's going to get you the thing that you want. And it's not a bad thing. It just is here, right? But we've turned it into this evil, right? So especially people in the kind of just the regular world just accept it as part of life. But people who are here in service have become ultra polarized against money, and it's caused all kinds of problems in the spiritual community. You've got people showing up saying, well, if you're here as a spiritual teacher, everything you do should be free, right? Because you shouldn't have anything to do with money, and you have to look and go, well, in a perfect world, sure, but my kids still need to eat, right? So, and you can't hold on to, this is another thing that I see with seekers, they'll have this concept, they take this spiritual concept again that they've picked up other places. Well, if you truly surrender to your work, God will provide, right? Well, sure. And God can provide for me through you when you pay me for my service. Right? You see? But they want to turn it into, it's because, again, the personal agenda is underneath it. The personal agenda is, I don't want to have to pay for it. I'm too cheap to pay for it. I want it. I say I want it more than anything, but I'm not willing to go bust my ass to get the money to do it, right? And that's the reality of what's sitting there. It has nothing to do with the teaching that God will provide, but we're utilizing that as our justification. Very benevolent, yeah, but our justification of why the way we're reviewing it is the right way, and then in complete resistance to the other side of it that says, "You're God. You're paying me money today. Thank you very much." Right? Yeah. So we take this thing with money and we turn it into something it doesn't need to be. And why shouldn't you? If you come forward in the world and whatever it is that you do. So Pyelian is, trying to build a business where she's her own entrepreneur, right? But it doesn't matter what you do. If you're viewing it from that space where the overriding component in it for you is that you are utilizing it as a way to be in service to humanity in general, or your community, or your family, or whatever it is, to be in service, right? There's no bad aspect in there that it can create income as well, right? Because simultaneously you're in service, and if money is coming in that's then going to foster greater service, well, why wouldn't money come in to do that? You see? Why wouldn't it? So we can't hold ourselves as, and it's true, you do watch for that little piece that might get a hold of the money part and get greedy with it. To see a sale for you as dollar signs versus, I can't wait to see what she looks like in a month after she's been doing this every day, like that's the overriding piece. And if the money comes on the backside of it, that's wonderful, and thank you, thank you, universe, for supporting my heart and my heart's calling. So whatever that calling is, and you're doing this because you, both of you, you're here in service, and you've both recognized that very strongly, That's why you're a teacher, you know. So you were here in service and knew that on a certain level far before you did deeper spiritual work. Because who the heck signs up to be a teacher? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not for the money. But that was your calling. Yeah. So now there are different ways that you still utilize being of service. And that's, you know, it doesn't make sense in this world. And I think that's the hardest part. And that's the big struggle for like all the nonprofits out there too. Getting people to recognize the level of service and to give accordingly. You know, it's hard to do. Because the ego is the ego, and if I can get it for free, yay me. Right? Right. But what the ego can't recognize is that in taking advantage of a situation, so let's say it's coming to satsang and you know, we don't charge a fee. If I take advantage of the situation where I'm just going to be here week after week after week, taking, and never giving in return, it's incredibly karmic. And it is going to show up in your world. I can't tell you when, right? It could be tomorrow, it could be next lifetime, who knows? But it is going to show up in your world because it's imbalanced. You've utilized a situation from a space that's very selfish and very self-centered. It's all about me. And what can I get from you? Yeah. And that's just not, that's not the heart. That's not the heart. So it is a line that we definitely walk. Yeah, in whatever capacity, you know, we walk it every day, and in beyond money, in everything, you know, in everything, in your relationship with other people, in your relationship with your kids, you know, recognizing that when you're pushing an agenda with the kids because you want what you want, because it's going to make it easier for you, and you kind of don't take their desires or their emotional needs or anything into consideration. It's just, no, you just do it. Right? And what's the difference? It's the same thing. So that is part of just the greater journey for every seeker, to continually be there to observe and to constantly kind of check in, which is what you're saying. That's what you're doing. You're checking in all the time, you know. Am I still in alignment here? Good. That's fabulous. And when you stop checking in, that's when we need to get worried, because that's exactly what mind does. It's so subtle. It sneaks in, right? It just sneaks in and then it runs away with itself. And before you know it, you've been completely sucked into the story and you're believing it hook, line, and sinker and have no idea that you've spiraled. Yeah. Right. So that's a marker of someone who actually is doing great work. To be able to see, oh, this is trying to run now. Yeah, this is I see you. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Remember, the stories don't have to disappear, right? You aren't your thoughts. And I'm not even going to put it that way. You aren't the thoughts, because they're not yours anyway. So thought's there and it runs through, but you aren't that. So be the witness to the thoughts. When you recognize there are times where the identification takes place, great. Go in there and let's dig it out and see why. Where is it you're still hung up? There's still fear and pain. It sits right there. So good. Let's go in and dig it out and find it and unearth it and let it release. Yeah. But other than that, you know, to walk out of something is as simple as recognizing it's just not real, right? Course correct, right? That's what we always say, just course correct. All right, we're off again. And it doesn't have to be more than that. That's one thing, and it's very hard, your students who have been with me a long time, so I can speak to you this way. For people who don't know anything about the work we do, this is a little dangerous, because mine's going to take that and go, oh, great. So every time, you know, I get ticked off at someone, all I have to do is say, this isn't real. And go into denial basically, like, plaster a smile on my face and pretend everything's great. And that is not what I'm telling you to do. At a certain point, after you've done enough dissolution work, you become capable of the detachment that's required to function in your life from a non-personal place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's what I'm speaking to. When you're capable of that, then when it does become personal, you're easily capable of moving out of it. But people will take this work and turn it into, a lot of the work that we do in the beginning, by going in and really doing psychological level work. That ends up being their crutch and their constant go-to. So whenever something happens, now I feel like I got to get in and dig and, well, that's just as much a trap as anything else. It truly is. It's just a piece. And beyond it, really, it becomes just the constant course correction, Bought into a story, course correct, detach, be objective, right? Take right action, keep moving.
Yeah. And can I just make one comment, because I was the one that wanted to go in and process everything, whatever came up.
Right.
And there was a point where you wrote to me and you said, and I realized that I actually used the processing to just beat myself up more.
Yeah.
And make myself feel worse about the whole thing. And I mean, it brought stuff up like, oh, I see this, I see that, but I realized that I was actually doing it to beat myself up more. And you basically wrote me and said to take it on the chin and, move on.
Exactly, yeah. And, it's funny, there comes a point where, like, I could say to you, if you're not walking out of a process laughing, you didn't do it right. Right? Because that's the whole thing. When you've seen through it, you see how ridiculous the whole thing is. And there's really nothing left but laughter. Really. Because it's just like, oh my God, that's great. And what you're saying is accurate. It's not meant to be the thing that's going to keep you locked into, look at what a failure I am.
No.
I can't even do this. I can't even do that. That is so not what processing work is meant to do. It's to free you from that, truly. And that's when you really know you've got it. When you start coming out of processes, feeling 10 pounds lighter and just joyous, like, and you're just laughing because, oh my gosh, it was ridiculous. Like, now you've got it. You've got it. Because it's so not personal. There's nothing going on in your world that's actually personal. Just stories of the ego and consciousness that is identified with the stories, and that's all that's going on, and you aren't any of it. You never have been. You never will be. It can't happen. Never the twain shall meet. The world of non-polarization, the world of polarization, they can never ever exist in the same space. They can't, right? So you don't have to turn out of this and into this. It's literally just waking up to what you are. And in the moments when you fall asleep again, you just wake up again, right? And it's not from the space of, oh, look how that was so stupid of me, and look at what an idiot No, because then you just made it real again. You just made it real, and it doesn't need to be. It's not real. That's really challenging because it takes a very, it takes a specific amount of dissolution of the personal self to get to a place where that truly makes sense, to say it's not real. Because you've had enough experience within it to recognize the reality that is. Outside of it, it's just a concept, and then we utilize the concept to continue our denial. We utilize the concept to continue to, just perpetuate our low self-worth. I'm such a loser, I'm never going to make it to enlightenment. Right? Right? Yeah, that's a big one. Oh, been doing this for 2 years now. I don't feel like I'm any closer. Or the reverse, you know. I must be really close. I must be really close. Yeah. So any question about that? Manipulation and humiliation. I think they're like, the two are so beautifully kind of intertwined when a seeker's really ready. And yeah. No question.
So with humility, I don't know if I fully understand humility, so I can't even say if I've really experienced it. I'm assuming I did at some point in my journey. But I think that I have confused humility with the times where I realize I did something wrong. I see it as embarrassing. And, you know, from that place, I guess to swing out from feeling embarrassed, maybe it could be, I'm so sorry, and then I explain myself, and, you know, I just kind of try to make the other person feel better, to right my wrong,
Mm-hmm.
You know, to be truly apologetic, whatever it may be. And I guess I don't know if, I can't tell humility versus me just acknowledging my part in it, and then kind of, I think, often reacting from an embarrassed place or a
Mm-hmm.
shameful place,
Mm-hmm.
even though I may not consciously feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole thing with, you know, me really trying to right my wrong and be apologetic, which I don't see anything wrong with that. But it's more or less, where is it coming from? Is it humility, or is it just embarrassment?
Right, so that the humility functions from that space of non-attachment, right? So yes, it will recognize that there was a wrong that I was part of, or a mistake that I was part of. And so it can come forward apologetically, right? But what humility recognizes within it, and you could speak to this because this is you, is that in your heart of hearts, it was not your intention for that, right? Okay, and so that's what comes forward, that I am terribly sorry that my actions created this and it was not my intention. But at that point, it's done, right? So it doesn't have an attachment to what the other side does with it, you see? And that's the difference. When you're doing it because you want them to forgive you or feel better about you, because as soon as they feel better about you, you'll feel better about you. That's not the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Humility says, I'm sorry, and I'll do what I need to do to right the wrong. But it wasn't my intention. It's nothing I'm going to beat myself up over. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. It happened, and there it was, and I'll fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And now we move on. You know, completely detached. Yeah.
Can I ask, one, do you feel that there's a difference between humility and being humble? And then, I know for me, for the longest time, humility and humble really equaled, what's the word, self-deprecation? Because that was what humble meant to me, was that if you, you know, like you always played down your value.
Right, and that's not humility. That's self-deprecation. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they they definitely are not the same thing. So being humble and having humility, it is the same component.
It is, okay.
Sure. And the humble person is the one who will recognize their own value, right? And not feel like they need to downplay their own value. They aren't there to boost themselves up either, because none of it is you from a personal place, right? So if I'm sitting here and having this discourse with you, and at the end someone writes to me and says, "Oh my gosh, like what you said was so amazing, and you're so whatever, how awesome," within that, the way that I perceive that is, it's just the ego doing what the ego does, right? But it's not personal to me. The self is what speaks through this form. It's not personal. It is the self, period. And so I'm pleased that there would be someone out there who would hear it and find value in it, because my service is to do what I can to reach out and to, spread the teachings. So on that level, I'm pleased. If it's another component that will, add to greater awakening, fabulous. But to view it as I'm so knowledgeable or I'm so anything is ridiculous. It's ridiculous because it's not personal. But in the same vein, I wouldn't, hide from what comes through, because what comes through is real and beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. It's just not me. The way that everyone thinks of me or I, right? And that is recognized. So, I'm always just glad to have been of service. And my thing is always, thank you for such kind words. Thank you. And I'm just terribly pleased that you got something out of it. End of story. End of story. So it's neither, it's not prideful, but it's not self-deprecating. It's not even in the same arena. Yeah, it stands on its own. And there's no battle in it. There's no battle there. It's not like I have to try to be humble. I have to watch myself from being prideful. Humility is. It just is. And so when it's present, it's present. And within it, it's an interesting thing because people can be humble to a fault, right? So within it, like I said, that you have to also know that you stand in your own authority, which the world won't see as humble necessarily, right? Yeah. So if I have someone who comes to me and says, I've had this vision, and why don't you have that vision and you don't see it, and why don't you see it? And and I say, I don't need to explain myself to you. I don't need you to understand me. I don't need you to anything, right? This is what I see, and this is the way it's going to be done. Now, people would look at that and say, how arrogant, how prideful. It's not. It's not. I have a level of authority because of where I function from, period, right? And I don't have to make excuses for that with anybody, or have to prove to them why I have a level of sight that I do. Why? That would just be buying into their story of whatever it is that their story wants to be, right? And there is humility even in that. Owning your authority doesn't make you arrogant. Like as a teacher, no different. You own your authority in that classroom. You are the authority in that classroom, right? Yeah, you have experience and wisdom those students don't have, and it needs to be recognized. And you're not there to have, debate about they think it should be this way, and it is this way. You're not there to debate it with them. They just need to recognize this is it. So it's not any different. Not any different at all. And the same can be true of what you do. Even in any job it is that we have, you have a level of authority within your experience there, And people who come in who don't have that, well, they could have read all the books in the world. They don't have the experience you have, right? Yeah. And so you got to own that. You're not there to make, apologize for yourself or make people understand. It just is. And let them project what they want onto you. Because that's their own stuff anyway. Yeah. Because if you just back it up, 30 seconds, you can see it. What they're doing is they're blaming you for the exact thing that they're doing in the moment. Aren't you arrogant? Really? Who's the arrogant one? The one who's coming with less knowledge and trying to put it on me as if I'm supposed to, value that over my own. Where's the arrogance? Right? Yeah, you see it? Yeah, but it's hidden. So the arrogance is hidden and it's unconscious. They can't see it. So instead they'll decide that you're the arrogant one. Right. Okay. Don't apologize for that when they get all bent out of shape. Let them. And don't run after them feeling like you've got to change their mind. Yeah. Because the greatest thing you can do, the greatest teacher there is in that moment is just to be true to you. True to your authority and true to your understandings and your knowing. And that's all that matters. Okay? There are those who will be ready that when that happens and they expect this engagement and you don't do it, there are those who will actually, ego's going to fight it, it's going to hate it. But when you hold your ground, some of them are actually going to go, oh my gosh, she's right. Wow. A moment of grace can come, and that moment of another piece of awakening happening where you go, oh, wow, I thought she was arrogant, and really I was the arrogant one, wasn't I? Yeah, those are beautiful moments. Beautiful moments. Because once you've had those, you can't undo them. When they're truly impactful, they stay with you forever. You don't forget them. And then they're always there as reminders, checks where you've walked through it once. I've done that before. So, and like you constantly monitoring back here, it's because of your experience that you're capable of doing that. Yeah. So we want to continue to foster that. Definitely. None of it is real. None of it is you. So if you can just take on the mindset that you will just be the reporter of you, right? Where it's not really my pain and my identification. It's this kind of other. And it's not from a level of denial. You're not denying that you're this because you are until you're not. You learned that lesson quite well in the past year. You are until you're not. And you will be identified with that until it's not necessary anymore. It is your teacher, right? And all of the beliefs and the attachments are your teachers. And so they will continue to be that until it's not necessary anymore. And then you'll walk from a different place. And that's what you do. Don't run away from it. Don't be in denial of it. But keep a healthy detachment from it. It's it's hard when you don't have the experience because it seems like I'm saying two completely different things. Like detach from it, but be it. It doesn't make any sense. But it's this beautiful interplay of both going on all the time. Really hard to speak to, but you as students, you know what I'm saying because you've walked it, so it makes sense to you. Anyone who hasn't walked it, it won't make sense to them. It's just going to confuse them, and I apologize for confusing anyone. But that's exactly what it is. There are times where you recognize it's time to really feel the identification, right? Because in order to walk out of it, I got to go through it first. But there are other times where you equally recognize this is not one of those times. This is a time just to detach and to see it just from back here. That's all that needs to happen.
I will say, because you're talking about standing in your authority and having you as an example. We talk about humility and humble and how a lot of us take it as self-deprecation. And there's times where you'll say something and, it'll be something about maybe a skill set that you have or how you feel about something. And, it's like at first you're kind of taken aback oh snap, did she just say that about herself? And then, but at the same time, it's like there was this shift where it was like, I understood that, you know, you can say something about yourself and it's just a fact.
That's right. Yeah.
It's, there's no feeling about it. It's nothing. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, that's something that I have to keep making sure, like, I can actually say something about myself, and it's not like I'm, you know, tooting my own horn or whatever. Like, it's just, it's a fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know? So having you as an example has been very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
To help
And
us walk that out.
that's right. And you, because there's the shift that takes place where you recognize, and again, language is so hard to utilize and have it make sense. But the things that come through that you really have a natural gift, a natural talent, a natural ability, you know, they're not the personal self.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't. It's a way that the self moves through you, right? And maybe it's, I'm a really fast typer, right? Or whatever, you know, like whatever it is, I'm a really proficient teacher. It's not personal to you. It's not like you created it. You were the doer behind it. It's a natural affinity that you have, right? And it shows up in the world. And so it is what it is. Yeah, and that's it. Very simple. It just is what it is. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. We done? Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Love you. Hi everyone, I'm Megan, and welcome to, I was gonna say confessions. It's like not confessions.
Confessions of a guru.
It'd be my confessions. Hi everyone, welcome to Conversations with Shusara. I'm Megan, and this is PLN, and what am I supposed to be talking about?
I'm Shusara. Blooper number 2.
I usually get it right the first time. I was just trying to think what I'm always